Welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange on this fine Thursday evening. This evening we've got the fabulous Daniel Westermayr joining us all the way from Germany. And I first met Daniel when he was on the Kanban Train the Trainer, where he was particularly awesome at. So he's a fully fledged AKT. So if you want to talk to him about Kanban, then he's always available. If not, I'm your girl. So I'd like to welcome you, Daniel. Give us a warm case welcome to Daniel. Take it away.
Oh my goodness, this is overwhelming. Actually, I'm not sure if I ever had so many people attending. So, and I gotta say, it makes me a little bit anxious. So, in terms of, to say the least. So I do hope, so in the upcoming, I don't know, maybe 40, 45 minutes plus questions, I hope there's something in it for everybody today. And even if it may not be exactly groundbreaking. So if you're looking for like that one silver bullet that you've always wanted to solve all your problems, this is probably not the place where to go. And then big shout out to Helen and Vlad and her team for inviting me and giving me that kind of confidence that I need, because to be honest, I was not too sure I'm good enough to present here. So it's an incredible honor being here. I'm just a couple of years away from becoming a Kanban trainer. And yes, Helen, you had a big part in getting me there. So the thing is, if there's one thing I've learned over my trainer career of the past few years, then it's that people's attention is biggest at the beginning and big and good at the end. So I prefer not talking about myself and instead jump right into it. I hope that's okay for everybody. So, and when I was thinking about what to talk about, I always try to have an interactive sessions. So meaning like it's not just about me talking to you and showing a handful of slides. I figured that especially with all that hot weather all around Europe. So probably it's a good idea if we don't just put on one side show. So the first question that I'm interested in, and let me get you to me, is which industry, which branch are you working in? So like, is it IT, is it automotive, telecommunications, commerce, finance? You get the picture. So show us where you're working at. Maybe you have a client, maybe you're working in a company. What industry are you working in? So got IT. So let's see if we can get all of it in like 2 minutes. So the timer. And if you're finished, then you can just put your pointer on the lower left, where's the mouse parking. Now, logistics, still more into telco, all in IT. Oh, new energy, that's awesome. So, and where is when you're writing Agile and coach freelance, where is your, maybe give an exemplary client. So is your client working in automotive? Maybe you have a finance client. Right now, I'm working part-time in a bank and also part-time in the hygiene industry. Amazing. So much diversity. It seems we're mostly finished. Gambling, let's get in touch. Oh, healthcare. Wow. We got a diverse group. Thank you so much. So, and the next thing that really interests me is, let me get you to me. Question 2 is scaling currently discussed in your organization? I mean, since we want to have a conversation today, or rather this evening, on scaling, free time, and 3 years of constraints, I wonder, is scaling a relevant topic or a relevant discussion in your industry, in the company, or with your client? If so, and if you know which framework or names are dropped frequently, please grab a dot and put it in the appropriate column. Like, if your company is all about safe, then you'd put your dot here. If it's any other framework that I have not named here, like Spotify model or whatever, then please put a dot on the right-hand side, and please let me know which one. And if for whatever reason your company is working maybe agile with teams but doesn't discuss scaling up, lucky you, then you'll find your space in the lower left corner. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then the lower right is your area where it reads scale what? Interesting. Yeah, Spotify. I thought so. Right. So it seems to me, the larger variety, or for the larger variety of you, scaling is a topic that is now discussed. I'm shying away from the term like the hot shit right now, but it's something that's relevant right now to you. So, and why do you think is that? Why do you think is scaling right now important? So I have a theory, and I try to phrase that theory, let me get you to me. And I phrased that theory in a way like, we want to scale within our company or in our client because we want to deliver more, whatever more means, more goal units, whatever, and or faster to our customers, all the while having stable quality. And if you agree with that statement, then please grab one of those purple dots and put it on the agreed column. Otherwise, put it on the right-hand side, and please elaborate a little bit. Okay, the real reason for scaling up is then, if it's not like delivering more goal units or faster towards our customer. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Expanding in new geographies, okay. I wonder, is expanding maybe a different phrasing of more, delivering more question? Or is it substituting? Ah, okay. The IPO roadmap. Visibility of progress of work to upper management. Would you need scaling for that? I'm unsure. Okay, addressing dependencies, I get it. I still have somehow the notion that you want to address dependencies for a deeper goal. So, because otherwise it may be, or I can't imagine that people would say, yes, our goal is to address dependencies. So it's more like, we need to address dependencies in order to achieve maybe also more and or faster, less time to market. Already scaled, but in a mess. Love it. So basically, from what I see, there is not like a real total objection towards, okay, we want to deliver more goal units to our customers and or reducing the time to market to our customers, and also all the while doing all this with a stable or even highest qualities. And also, I think maybe the new business offerings, typically it comes on top, right? So it may be just like related, to say the least. So, and now, since you have, I really love that we are already scaled, but it's a mess. Let's have a look at your organization, maybe the client that you're working on, maybe your company. The question would be, first of all, it makes sense for any organization to aim for a better delivery than before, right? And also the TPS house, it reads highest quality, lowest cost, shortest lead time, which is sort of like a summary of all that companies could strive for. And if we now pause and reflect for a moment, and maybe ponder the following question: if you have your company or your client in mind, what is more likely to happen in your organization? Is it more likely that work that's in the system waits for people, or are people waiting for work? And please now grab one of the purple dots from the left-hand side and put it on the appropriate column. Okay, so that was quick. I thought that we might need to spend more time on that, but it's great. So it seems like the variety of organizations, or when we look at the systems that we find in a variety of organizations, then typically work waits for people, not the other way around. So, and now we come to the right-hand side, to the yellow dots. Which of those two variants is more likely to create flow? Do we receive more flow when work waits for people, or do we receive a better flow when people wait for work? That makes for a nice contrast, doesn't it? So we here think that typically work waits for people, but when we think about flow, we should maybe be able to have people waiting for work. So, and what's interesting, I think there's an inconvenient truth hidden in those two columns, because when today work has to wait for people, which means we see no flow, what might happen if we now try to scale up that situation? Please fire away. You can create a sticky, you can fire away, you put a message in the chat. What will happen if we try to scale that system that we see now? Work waits for people, no flow. Well, let's give an additional minute. Collect the results of scaling the current system. I love we scale an anti-pattern. Very cool. So you're obviously right, or we have the same thoughts. The only thing you'll receive by scaling up the system that we see today, the only thing you'll receive is a big mess of waiting queues, work stuck somewhere within the system, and unhappy people on all ends, management and workforce. Managers typically are unhappy because they can't understand, they can't grasp why even the smallest things take an infinite time. Who here in the room has ever heard a sentiment or a phrase like that before? Why is it that we need ages for even the smallest things? You can also click on the reactions in Zoom if you want. So who has ever heard a situation like that? In our organization, even the smallest things take infinite time. Oh, I see some smiling. Yeah, and when management utters phrases like that, in my experience, that will in turn produce stress and increase the need for pushing more work into our system, right? Because it's an intuitive reaction. We know that things tend to take much time in our system, so the reaction would be, let's just start earlier. And the reason for that is basic math, I guess. So it's, yeah, scaling means increasing the number of people without regards of communication knots, definitely. So the reason for that problem is maybe or probably a mathematical problem, because the more utilized people are, the more waiting time you'll get. And the nearer you get to 100% utilization, the nearer your queue gets to infinity, which is a sad reality in most of the organizations I have seen, and I'm seeing it currently with my clients. And how about you? Can you give me a few impressions, create some stickies or put some comments in the chat? Can you give me a few impressions on what you have seen? The same? Is it different? Enough minutes maybe for some comments, and then we'll proceed. Oh yeah, thanks for that comment. Unrealistic planning over 100%. I've seen this frequently with my clients where people like, yeah, okay, can you just squeeze something in? I know you're 100% booked, but could you just please? Make people work harder. We'll get to the deadline problem later on. So, but my takeaway from this is now, it feels that we agree that people must not be utilized to their full capacity. And we could just rephrase this, I guess, in saying, or by, people need to have some amount of slack time. And if we accept that, and whenever I'm having that conversation with leaders in companies, then a new and quite interesting question comes up. Okay, you're telling me that people need a certain amount of slack time, but how much is this? How much slack time is appropriate? I don't want to have people sitting around idling around either, right? So, and obviously this, from an economical viewpoint, it doesn't make sense to have everybody sitting around. So, but we also agree that it won't help if everybody is being busy to show off some kind of productivity. And this is where, in my experience, theory of constraint comes into place. I figure that most of you have some ideas or have some knowledge about TOC. So let me just sum it up briefly. The idea is that every stable living system has exactly one constraint. This constraint serves as a limiting factor to the overall systemic capability, which means the overall output of any system cannot be greater than its constraint. Good grief, you should have seen the lightning right here. For a moment, it felt like a bolt from the sky. Good grief. So if it were any different, any system could generate unlimited goal limits. So there has to be something that constrains the output of our system. And we will get the optimal output if that constraint is neither over nor underutilized. And I might add that I feel that TOC has a very humane approach to it as well, because it silently assumes that people are inherently good. It assumes that if a system is set up in a good way, people will behave accordingly in a good way that serves the organization. So, but how do we find out where our constraint is? And should we just practice looking for constraint a little bit? Let's find ourselves a constraint. And I have prepared two small examples. Hold on. So what do you think? Where is the constraint in this picture? Please grab a dot and put it to the place where you feel it is. Very cool. So I would go with the majority here. So there is a small, narrow thingy in that eyedropper, meaning no matter how much water or liquid you put anywhere else here, the output of that thing is constrained by that smallest part in the eyedropper. Okay, let's make it a little bit more complex or a little bit harder for everybody. Whereas here our constraint.
What if the constraint is not in the picture though, Daniel?
You think so?
Yeah, because
Yeah, it's going to
you're
make up
talking
for.
like airspace, you're talking about, air traffic control.
That's interesting. So we'll get to that in an instant. Good remark, though. So typically, and I've been looking into queue management in airports as well a little bit. So what typically is mentioned is that the constraint is in the runway, because the runway is limited to one airplane at one point in time, meaning no matter how much parking space you have in your airport, no matter how crowded you'll make the airspace, and theoretically there's a little bit of space between planes flying in. Every runway is exactly for one plane to fly in or one plane to depart. So if you want to scale your airport, you just can't do so by squeezing more planes on the runway, at least if you don't want to ignore all sorts of safety mechanisms. So, and we could have a discussion on that, but for now I'll be going for the runway. And it also makes up for one interesting part of the conversation. So it's not easily scaled, any kind of airport, because typically you'd need some kind of extra runway, right? Here in Munich, we have the discussion now for a third runway on the airport. The other stuff we typically don't discuss. We don't discuss airport space. We don't discuss parking space for airports. We discuss typically like, should we add an extra runway for more flights putting in? So, but the interesting information is now we have a discussion on where is the constraint. So we align, we will probably get a shared understanding by that discussion. And the next question that we need to address is, what do we think might be a good load on the constraint? Remember, the idea is the constraint, just by having that part in your system that constrains the overall system, this is the defining part of your system. You will not be able to get more achievement or more output out of your system than the constraint will allow. So what do you think? I have a couple of options to choose from. Let me put the dots a little bit nearer to it. So what do you think? What is a good load on a constraint and why? Yes, it's also true. The load depends on the arrival pattern. That's correct. But still, somewhere, if you want to put a dot somewhere here in those different options, where do we see the load of our constraint? What would be the best or a good option? So, and I think it tends in the right direction. So probably the options that I chose are not perfect. So it should be somewhere around in the 80% area. It depends a little bit also on your safety mechanisms. So if you expect unforeseeable events for whatever reason, and you need to deal with them immediately, then you would probably tend more towards of the less of the left-hand side, right? Even go less than 80%. So the research shows that a good load in the constraint, as I said, is somewhere at the or even below the 80% threshold. And one of the main reasons, at least in my opinion, is that even with your constraint in place, you still want to be able to react to those unforeseeable events that I mentioned a few words earlier. Imagine you have utilized your airport to the max. You couldn't possibly squeeze an additional airplane into it. What happens if you have to deal with an emergency landing? At least you'll get a lot of replanning, that's for sure, because you just cannot easily reschedule all the other parts that you have just so neatly placed to each other. So, and then that means, okay, if we transfer this now to the teams in your organization, how do we find out about the constraint in your organization? So what I've learned from the TameFlow book, or from adapting the TameFlow book to the organizations that I had to look into it, the answer is you look for the longest queue in front of the team you're looking on. You just count how many items they have sitting in front of them, how much work they have sitting in their backlogs. And just assume that once we have done our research, and it looks a little bit like that. So we check on the queue on each team, we sort by the number, and what do you think? Where could the constraint right now be? Which team? Just write the number on a sticky. Which team would be the constraint? And it's not a trick question, by the way. Yeah, perfect. So this is an arbitrary example in terms of number of teams, but I have done a similar exercise in one organization in the past, and it roughly shows the same. You can quite easily identify on how much work sits in front of a team. And in a specific case that I remember, it was, not surprisingly though, a platform team, because literally everybody was requesting some things from them, like a firewall clearance that took them roughly 5 months. In other words, this organization, they had ready software on the shelf, and they couldn't put it out to their customers because they couldn't clear the firewall sooner or quicker than 5 months time. Since we have talked about the ideal load on a constraint, and if we now would say we reduce that load of, in that example, team 4, or we reduce the projects that are now in the system to accommodate or to a load of 80% on team 4, let's further assume we subordinate everything to that, then it would look something like that. And the question to me is, now what catches your eye if we have the same distribution, if we have everything subordinated to our constraint? What will happen? I'll cut down every project in the house so that the constraint is loaded to a max of 80%. What catches your eye? Let's give a handful of minutes. Yes, everybody's queue got smaller. Yes. Oh, I love freaky fast. Yep. Team 11 got smallest. Team 4 looks balanced. Yeah, perfect. So let me just add here the 80% mark. And that means in turns, first of all, this is the slack time that we talked about before. Before, team 4 was definitely totally overloaded, totally overburdened. And what makes matters more interesting is that everybody has gotten additional slack time, additional free time. And basically, this is the time, or this is the free time that I was mentioning in the title of this session, or in today's conversation. This is the free time that I'm talking about, cutting down everything to accommodate the constraint, which frees up additional time. And there is sort of an inconvenient, another one, good grief. There is another inconvenient truth here. You'll have some kind of potential productivity, right? This is that second area that I just factored in. This is a potential productivity. This is like Team 7 could work on more things, potentially, but it just doesn't make sense because they could not get it out of the door because they'd have to rely, or they'd be dependent on Team 4. And that is what makes things totally interesting. When you're looking at the theory of constraint, you'll find out where you have potential productivity that you can't really use productivity. It's like the same in a relay race, right? In a relay race, you have a potential productivity of 4 people running, but at any given moment in time, only 1 person is running. But you'll get the baton from start to finish quite quickly. This is also the reason that if you look at other sports teams, individually, the individuals on a team, they tend to have some amount of free time. At least when I'm looking at games, be it soccer or baseball or whatever, not every player is utilized the same amount at any given moment. So we'll receive some kind of inconvenient truth that there is a productivity that's only potentially there, maybe even just on PowerPoint, but you can't use it to get stuff out the door. So we just have found out that by using TUC, we'll find much time in our organization that if we try to use it, it serves more for overall busyness maybe, instead of real productivity in a sense, get stuff out the door, deliver stuff. And we'll get to that in an instant. I will just give you another kind of an idea. Maybe just have a look at this situation again. Maybe it makes sense to send Team 11 to the rescue of Team 4. Right? So because we now found out it just doesn't make sense, or the team that has now the most free capacity is Team 11. We could use them for whatever. We could use the time for whatever. Why don't we send them to Team 11 to help them out? And frequently comes up like, okay, they're not specialized enough and they're doing totally different things. Maybe they can find something else to relieve Team 4. Because remember, no matter how small your improvement is in the end, here it's immediately improving the whole system. To give you an example, I had a similar situation once with one of my clients. I think it was last year. They had a quite elaborate process. I will not go into detail, but what's interesting was that only the architect was supposed to do code review. Remember, they had, I don't know, 12 or 14 developers in those 2 teams, but only 1 person was supposed to do the code review. And they didn't want to change that. Yeah, you get the picture, like, okay, this is a highly specialized role. It takes like forever to get to that point where you really trust people to review other people's code, etc., etc. But on the other hand, the relation between, or the amount of developers was 12 times higher than that 1 architect. You get an impression on how long it took them to get stuff out the door because work was waiting so long in code review column. And they didn't want to change it. So what we were doing is we were looking at all the other stuff that architect was doing. And we found out, okay, he was preparing slides for architecture review meetings. He was planning the agenda for community of practice. You get the picture. Typically, those specialized roles, they do a lot more than just their specialized function. And what we did was we gave these things to somebody else. And all of a sudden, the lead time for code review sank from 12 days to 8 days. May not sound much, but remember, it was a small change for the company, and it still reduced the overall time by 4 days, right? We saved up 30% lead time by just relieving that specialized role of every activity except the specialization work. And still, let's just for a moment ponder that management could accept this notion like we had before. This is all the amount of slack time you have in your organization. Maybe people will be scared away, but imagine for a moment we could accept this notion. What do you think? How would people, if all of a sudden they're underutilized, how would they make use of their newfound freedom, their newfound slack time? Please create stickies with whatever you can think of. Let's spend another maybe 1:30 on that. Ah, thanks for mentioning Herbie. That one make me think, take weekends off. I hope that doesn't mean that in your organization, people have to work over the weekend. But right, obviously. So what we see is we have a picture of people that people want to achieve something. So what we found out is people will do the stuff, or we think that people will do the stuff that otherwise they've never found the time to do so. Document. Maybe look a little bit or think a little bit further than just your own turf. Clean up, learn, help out others, find ways to improve, right? Innovation takes place, or typically in slack time. Improving capabilities, working on the tech debt, all that stuff where organizations claim we'd love to, but we don't find the time. All the while, and make no mistake, doing all that while generating the same or even better results than now. That is what really makes my head spin, that it's possible to work in a more sustainable way and even create better results. In short, I firmly believe that all of these things, that agile or agile movement, agile transformation, please substitute with the word that you find appropriate, all that stuff that agile promised in the first place will only achieve if we proceed keeping TOC in mind. Look for the constraint, subordinate everything to the constraint, and only then try to elevate the constraint. I haven't found yet a better way to find out about a constraint or visualizing the work. Obviously, I have never found a better way than doing with Kanban. So because it'll give you the necessary information on where to act. Basically, that's all content-wise that I have. And as I promised, so it's not like really groundbreaking stuff here that I was talking about. I'm Daniel. I'm a Kanban trainer and partner at Colenet. We're a small consultancy based in Germany. Please get in touch, connect on LinkedIn, and let's discuss how to help organizations to get there. Here is your ticket out. So please, if you like it, write down 1 or 2 tweets. What was a good insight or an eye-opener of the past, I don't know, roughly not yet like 40 minutes or so. If you have open questions, ideas, remarks, we'll just deal with them in an instant. And maybe there's something else you want to get off your chest. This is the place to do. Thank you, Helen, for giving me the space. And yeah, it's just an awesome experience being here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Daniel. Let's give Daniel a round of applause. Amazing. So now is question time. Who's got a question from Daniel? What you can do is you can either put your hand up in the chat, so not in chat, on your screen, or what you can do is you can pop your question into the chat window, and I'm happy to ask it for you if you don't want to. Okay. So what questions have you got? Natasha, fire away.
Thank you.
Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Daniel. A great, insightful session. Thank you so much. My question is more related to the early startups, which want to scale, but during the initial phase itself, they tend to they fail, right? So the whole plan of scaling just takes a back seat for them. And this is very common in Asia right now. So
okay, interesting.
Looking at theory of constraints and a combination of Kanban, what is it that consultants can do for them to help them build their scalable stories?
So if I get that right, is like startups, so they don't have a structured way in getting scaled, so they just have the notion or they feel that they need to get more stuff out the door. Is that right?
It's both, Daniel.
Okay. So what I typically do, and I've been working like obviously like in larger corporates and also in small and medium companies. Actually, we've been working at a metalworks company like in the past year. So first of all, what I typically do is I talk to leaders. What is your goal? And it's like getting more work out the door with shorter lead time. So that is like the one goal that they have. And then it's like, okay, let's visualize the work that you have. Let's visualize the system that the work has to go through. And then, at least in my experience, most of the things work out by themselves because like, okay, why is work getting stuck here? Okay, because we need the people from over there. Okay, what are they doing? Oh, they work on this. Now related to your company goals, which of these two is more important? All right, I get it. And then we get to a sequence of, hopefully a sequence of initiatives, and then we work on them from top to bottom. Does it help?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. I'll also connect on LinkedIn to continue our conversation.
Thank you so much. Love to. What else? Oh, and I read in the chat, good reference, the principles of product development flow. Yeah, obviously, Don Reinhardt's book is a one great eye-opener of literature. It's not the easiest read, though, I gotta say. So it's more like a dry read, but it's amazing, the insights, if you can find it if you can find the book. What else?
Any other questions for Daniel at all?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So on the, I'm going to say the switch where you go from finding where your constraint is on team 4 and you move over into the right side of going back to 80%. Is that essentially limiting WIP, or what was the mechanism where you got to talk them down to the 80%?
So it's like, first of all, it's like pausing everything that's currently in the system. So, and then see how that, or what effects this has on the rest of the company. So it's a large, maybe it's even a leap of faith, but the thing is, once you have accepted the truth that you cannot have a higher output than your constraint, then you're almost there. And in that organization where I was talking about, since the platform team was so overloaded, it was pretty much a no-brainer once we found out, okay, they have the longest queue in front of them, in front of this. It was the longest queue in front of them.
Okay. I think I get it, because in with Kanban, obviously it doesn't, if whether you're at the company or you're just on like a team of teams situation, I feel like I'm living it right now, where I've been able to, their constraint was in their delivery, and they had so many things in progress, and now they're finally finished with the release, quote unquote, but the product owner, I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, is the constraint now, because they do not have enough ready work. So there's a lot of idle time. So I've suggested that they do those things down below, right? Is like, what great amount of time to get to know more of the app, do, all of these other things. So since I'm at that moment, essentially, I have the ability to say, okay, what can we, right? Like, just worry about getting one feature and then letting it flow through the system. Don't worry about getting the entire batch of that next quote unquote release that,
Exactly.
people are wanting. Okay.
Right. And what's like really interesting, and this is like, it makes my head spin, right? So you see in companies things like, okay, you got a team here, and it's like somebody is standing on their back. It's like, yeah, you have to produce more. You have to do this. And now this is important. Please get it out the door early. And they try their best to accommodate, and it works. And then you look at the work, and it just waits. It idles for the next 6 weeks before the next team in the line cannot deal with that demand. So the question to me is like, what good did it do? Or what positive effects did it have that we just pressurized the team to deliver that stuff earlier? And this is then getting see you all in Meyerhofen next week. So, and this is like the next level of any kind of agility. Elevate your view from team only to a whole value stream, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Amy.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. What else? Here is Mike.
So thank you very much. Really insightful, Daniel. Thank you. Question for you, though. We come back to your airport illustration. I think you said that the runways were clearly the constraint, and you'd done some research on this. And I think I agree with you on that. But would you agree possibly that one of the ways of improving performance, I wouldn't say alleviating the constraint, would be new hull materials, for example? So new hull materials on airplanes would make them lighter, which would increase your ability to increase the capacity of an airplane. So you don't alleviate the constraint, but you do allow for better throughput.
Exactly. Yeah.
But not by alleviating what you've identified as a constraint.
Yeah, that's a good example, though. I use mostly the terms of the airport because, I mean, somebody wrote down in the beginning, yeah, we typically say when we find there's a constraint, we add more people, right? Because it's like easy. Okay, so Daniel is like overloaded, so let's put Mike next to him, and then we'll magically the workflow better, whatever. So, but it's an invest, and typically we don't know what we get out of that invest. So, and if I use an example like an airport, or maybe something like a traffic, like a adding new traffic lanes or new highway lanes, then it's like, okay, that's something that's not easily done. So we can find something else, to quote your example, to reduce the load on the constraint could also be a good idea. So, but the end still remains, you cannot perform better than your constraint. So, but it's a good idea, though, to find something else that makes the load easier on your constraint.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Where are you from? Nice background.
Originally, South Africa.
Oh, wow. one of the greatest places I've ever been to.
Oh, fantastic.
What else?
Any more questions at all?
But we have bedtime, KSF.
So I'll throw one more in there, Daniel.
Yeah, please
With you
do.
eulogizing theory of constraints, and I agree with you, but it's not a perfect silver bullet. So where, if you've seen theory of constraints fail, where do they tend to fail? And I'm not talking about understanding or implementation. I mean, as a theory, where do they fail? Do you know?
So probably it's when, so Eli Goldratt was like saying, you do these 5 focusing steps over and over and over again until the constraint is the market. So this is probably something that most of the people can't really grasp. Like, so in theory, the idea is easy. Like, okay, at some point you'll be able to produce more than the market will consume. But typically is like, okay, does this really work? Has this ever been the case? So this is probably the one thing on a theory that I stumble over.
So yes, I can give you a good example. In South
Oh, that's
Africa,
good.
we've got a retail store called the Mr. Price Group. And currently they've got a problem of oversaturation. So they can't open up any stores in South Africa that doesn't take away customers from other stores. So you get that saturation, and then you have a market causing a constraint.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. And how are they dealing with it? Do they still open up new ones? So because we just do, or?
So either you go and you try and sell products outside of your existing scope, or you go international.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you then open up new markets so that you don't oversaturate the one home market, right?
Sure.
You obviously are very knowledgeable in theory of constraints. Love it.
Okay, so I've got a question in the chat for you, Daniel.
Okay.
Giant organizations who have scaled their work to meet their size and continue to pursue growth, how do we get them to slow or pause to identify the real constraint? That's from Amy.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wish I could have. I wish I have a great answer to that. So, but I haven't. So and mostly it happens, or these problems happen, in my view, when there is a huge distance between what the company views as, okay, this is our delivery stuff, and the customer itself, right? So when I look at one of my clients in the bank, it's like, okay, there is, I don't know, 12 teams or what between the product and the final customer. And still they're making huge boatloads of money. So where is the notion, or where is the pressure to change? So, and I think in most of the companies that you are describing, there is still too much money in the system, so people don't feel the urge to do something different. So it's more like, okay, we do this, what we have always done in the past, and just relabeled it. So you see all kinds of, at least I do, I see all kinds of roadmaps, and I see all yeah, we know that this stuff needs, I don't know, 6 months to get out the door. And they accept this as if it were a given. But it's just a result of some decisions, right? And this is typically where I start my conversation. Is this an unchangeable given situation, or is this something that if we'd have enough political capital, if we have enough power, if we could change it? And people would then acknowledge, yeah, we could also decide differently. But still, for most bigger companies, there's just too much money in the market. I look at the German automotive companies, for instance. I've been working a year in automotive, and they had the same situation, right? So they had a lead time between, I don't know, 18 and 24 months. So from a software perspective, it's like, what? So, but I mean, they're making $12 billion per year. Why would you do something different? I'm sorry, I don't want to end this on a downer.
I actually had a question for Amy on her question, if I could.
Sure, please.
So, Amy, is your question, because of the iterative nature of theory of constraints, that in an organization that is so large, by the time you've identified the constraint may have changed, because of just how large it is, or is your point a little different?
So I'm not working at the whole digital portfolio level. I'll just say right now I'm working within a team of teams. Let's just say they went from 1 to 3 so that they could quote unquote get more work out the door, right? And so we know the mess that it created. So I worked through a development bottleneck, cleared that. Then there was a QA bottleneck because then obviously, right? So we reduced batch size and said, hey, let's not continue working on all this stuff that's unfinished. And then that created a QA bottleneck. And now I'm at that point where stuff's out the door. And now it's actually kind of a blessing that there's a quote unquote PO bottleneck. There's people that are idle, so that I can go ahead and start that flow where it's like we don't have to do all of this entire batch and get through all of it ready to start the work. We can go ahead and do a one piece kind of or a batch flow and do small things so that it can actually get running. So it's kind of playing into the hands. And I think the bottlenecks, quote unquote, have kind of worked in my favor so that we can get to a good flow rate, if you will.
That's great. So what that typically happens, so the constraint probably moves. So, and if you have solved one, there's going to be the next one, probably. And
Exactly.
at some point you find out, okay, we have maybe a decision bottleneck, right? Meaning we could get more stuff out the door, but we just don't know which ones.
Yeah, it sounds as though Amy did everything right, so that's great.
Brilliant. So
And thank you. This really helps me to tell my story, because this is kind of a pilot situation, but obviously it goes all the way on the portfolio level. So whenever we tell it on the story level, where it's not necessarily everyone in the leadership, we can take this example and apply it at the portfolio level.
Mm-hmm.
And have you taken metrics away to be able to prove that the alleviation of these constraints has helped, so that you can sell this idea at a portfolio level?
So I think right now our credibility has been built that we're able to get something out the door.
That's good.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good. And the principles are just basically the same on a team from a team perspective, also on the portfolio level. But it's just like, so, and that's what I meant with the pain that the people are feeling, or that the company is feeling, has to be high enough. They have to feel like a pain, because otherwise probably things would not change. So, and what I typically in larger organizations see is like, yeah, we have pain, but okay, then let's do something different. Oh, maybe not. So this is probably the hardest part to, I'm not saying inducing some pain, but it's like, just like, okay, if people don't feel that pain, then probably there's not going to be much change. So I'm lucky. So at least one of my clients, they feel the pain, and I've been able to work with them on a portfolio level, and they now really see where the work gets stuck, and they have a conversation on what are we going to do about it. And they're open to change their ways. So because what typically happened before is like, oh, okay, you need to work harder, right? Why don't you get that stuff out of the door? Yeah, but even if I could, what good would it do? So, and that is the conversation that I'd like to have with companies and with senior management or leadership in companies.
Yeah, I think that the tough part that I have to get over, and I think you alluded to this earlier, is the cultural piece of the people that are idle. They're feeling like they're doing something wrong because they're not busy, and they're kind of almost, upset with the PO that there's not ready work. So if we can get to the it's okay and you should be doing these things, that alleviates that and kind of calms their worries that we are on the right track, and we're not going to be quote unquote in the same position where we're behind, we have all this work again. We're not going to repeat what just happened. We don't want to go ahead and start stuff and just create it all over again and go through that process again.
Yeah, and that just starting stuff is the thing, right?